You've been in situations where you're feeling the strong leading and the strong nudging in your spirit to do something or to be somewhere, and then you hesitate because of fear or because of logic, environmental influence, or maybe it's just because it's away from the normal things you're used to. You're listening to the How is Life podcast, and I am your host, Chidinma Chika. Let's get into it. Welcome back. Welcome back to the episode. You are listening to season 4, episode 4. If this is your first time coming across the podcast, you're welcome. Usually, every episode is categorized under themes. In the month of February, we were on the theme New Beginnings, and now for the month of March, we are in seasonal directions. So, for the third episode, we talked a lot about how life unravels in seasons and how your purpose is not one thing. Your purpose comes and reveals itself in seasons. So you don't expect that you'll be one thing all through your life. We discussed that in the previous episode. So if you need to check that out, not if you need to check that out. So you'll see the link attached to this video or this audio. Click on it and just get in on what the conversation was about. On this episode, we are going to be looking at another dimension of seasonal directions, and that is that life in God demands obedience. Life in God demands obedience. Like I started the episode, I said, you must have been at one time, two times in your life that God asked you to do something or be somewhere or meet someone that you just generally hesitated. Sometimes because of fear, because of doubt, because of your rational thinking, or because it's different from the kind of things, it's different from the ways He would usually lead you, and you just hesitate to do it. For someone like me, that most times I tend to work with a lot of ration, a lot of logic, and I want to be sure. I mean, why am I doing this at this point in time? What is the reason behind it? Is it something worthwhile? Is it something we should do? And the way this episode is going to go, I'm going to be answering questions that I had at points where I felt obeying God was such a task, such a burden, such a heavy duty material to engage with. And the first thing I asked myself is, what is obedience? I came across a scripture where the ark of God was being transferred from place to place. And God gave a very simple instruction. He said, do not touch the ark. And now one soldier that probably was in charge of keeping and being the protocol of the ark of God, they get to a point where the road seems shaky or the road is not as smooth, and then it seems like the ark of God is about to topple down, and he quickly rushes to grab it so it doesn't fall. Now you can look at this as an outsider and say, I mean, he was trying to honor uh honor God and honor his relics, honor the things of God by doing that. But you see, at that point, God struck him dead. Why? I didn't send you. I didn't ask you to do it. So it then made me begin to wonder, what then is obedience? Now, obedience is that one thing, that's one very key element that is required in carrying out the will of God. So, in every season of your life, whatever the direction God is giving you, if obedience is lacking, you cannot function in anything concerning God, concerning His will. If obedience is lacking generally, you cannot, just know you cannot be in the will of God. It's not possible. Because I mean, for you to be in accordance with the plan, you have to go in accordance with the plan. And going in accordance with the plan is obedience. Obedience is proof of your trust in God. Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Obedience is proof that you are living that scripture as your reality. I've also come to understand that obedience is not just doing what God asked you to do, it's doing it how He asked you to. Now, like I said earlier, I'm going to be using Moses a lot because he obeyed God, but his obedience spanned across different phases, different emotions. And so with Moses, we could see raw obedience, we could see total obedience, we also saw partial obedience. The second time the people of the Israelites were thirsty and needed water. They complained to Moses, and then he asked God, what can I do for these people? And God says, take the rod, gather everybody together, but then speak to the rock and tell it to bring forth its water. Now, two things happened there. God said, take the rod in the first scenario. He also said, take the rod in the second scenario. But he did not ask Moses to use the rod in the second scenario. But Moses had already somehow assumed that, since he has already said, strike the rock and the water will come out, he assumed that was how the second scenario was going to play out. But God specifically told him, speak to the rock. And then he went and struck the rock twice. God was upset, and God told Moses, because you did not believe in me. Now, it wasn't even because you didn't do what I said. It was because you didn't believe in what I had told you. You believed in the results of the former instead of me. And this is what we do sometimes in our present realities. We often believe the results of maybe other people or the testimonies of other people as opposed to what God is asking us to do. God asked Moses to speak to the rock. Moses held on to the former processes that gave him the result, and then he struck the rock. Now, this is to say that in your obedience to God, in your obedience to that direction, in whatever way He's directing you, either for your family, relationships, your career, your ministry, whatever aspect of your life He's directing you to, it's important that you also get the means, His process. Get how He's asking you to do that thing. Because another thing I've come to understand is that partial obedience is still not obedience. Obedience is completely, as I have said it, how I said you should do it. That is what obedience is. So now it goes to the second question that I would usually ask myself: how do you function in obedience? How do you function with obedience? Because sometimes it can be very hard, it can be very tasking, and it can even be so different from what we're used to. And I've come to understand that we need 4 things to function in obedience. Firstly, we need joy. You cannot obey if you are not joyful. Psalm 37 verse 4 says, delight in the Lord and He will give you the desires of your heart. Joy is one factor that kind of eases out the burden of obedience. The second is hope. If you do not hope that there is something at the end of it that God is calling you to do. Now, it might not be material. Just that hope that God cannot let me fall. God cannot let me fail. God cannot leave me, He cannot leave me stranded. Just that hope can ease the burden of obedience. Now, the third thing you need is faith. You would need faith. And the fourth one, which is even still as critical as the first 3, is acknowledgement. Acknowledge the Lord in all your ways. It's easier when you're about to start a journey and God says, you know what, don't go left, go right. You might maybe grumble, you might say, oh, it's gonna be hard, it's gonna be this, it's gonna be that, but you will still go right. But what if you have already started on going left? You are even midway the journey in the path of left. And then at that point, you now say, okay, God, what are you saying about this journey? And then He's asking you to go right. You can see how it's more difficult to change the terrain than it is to acknowledge Him at the start of it. And so these 4 things are very key in functioning in obedience. You need joy, you need faith, you need hope, and you need to acknowledge Him. Another question I used to ask myself then, and I looked for answers to it, is why is obedience better than sacrifice? Why can't I just do what I want to do and sacrifice later? Well, that's because it will come from a place of self. So you've disobeyed, but you're not coming back to sacrifice, because you then think that God is one to be bribed, and then you can do what you want to do it however you want to do it, and come to give Him some things to appease Him. It's trying to tell you it doesn't work like that. It's either you obey me or you face the consequences. Leave sacrifices, leave all those things. I'm not interested in it, because your obedience shows that your heart is to Him. So He's asking you, obey me. This is proof of your love. This is proof of your loyalty. This is proof that you actually mean all the things that you cry about, that you preach to people, that you say to people. This is the proof I need from you. And so this is why obedience is better than sacrifice, because obedience is the proof of your love. Sacrifice in this context is a proof of self. Another question was, why does obedience feel foolish? Why does it feel and look foolish? One, because God's ways are not our ways. very basic, very simple, but it's the truth. Let's not turn it into a cliche. God's ways are not our ways. So, in the eyes of men, it will look foolish. In the eyes of yourself, it's going to look foolish. Imagine at the point of your life where you ought to be doing the things your mates, in quotes. If you're listening to this on Spotify, just know that I did air quotes with my hands. So, you're at the point where your mates are trying to get something. They're trying to achieve a particular milestone that is due them at that point in their life, and God is telling you, that's not what I want you to be doing right now. I want you to be focusing on this. I want you to do this. I want you to train for this. I want you to do this. And then every other person is like, why are you not trying to pursue this milestone that we are all pursuing? And you just don't know how to tell them that God is the one that asked you to do this thing. It can be very difficult to explain. It can be very difficult to share. There's something very beautiful someone said. They said God's call to you wasn't a conference call. It was a very personal, very private call. So why do you feel the constant need, the pressure to be able to explain it to others? It's not necessary. Do as long as you are sure that that is what God has asked you to do. And there's another thing that confirms whether God has asked you to do it, or whether that thing that you are looking at obeying is either from God, the devil, or yourself, is that you will get confirmations from the word. You can get confirmations from the people that give you wise counsel. Oftentimes, I'm sure once or twice you might have experienced this. Someone just picks up the phone to call you, and then when they're speaking with you, they just say some things that's what God told you about. So these are the ways God confirms that He's asking you to do that thing. And another reason it might feel foolish or look foolish to obey God is that there's a part of you that is still in need of approval from your parents, from your friends, from your classmates. When where you are, or when being in obedience to God's will and to God's direction is not how they thought they would see you, or how they thought you would be at that point in time, they don't give you the approval that you need. And that whole process of not getting that approval stings at you. This is where you also have to now realize that there's still work to be done. I mean, there's work to be done with everybody, but there's still work to be done in that aspect of your life. You don't need the approval of people to obey God. You don't need the approval of your friends to obey God. You don't need the approval of society to obey God. You obey God because you need to obey God, because it's a requirement of your love. It's a testing of your faith. It's a testing of what you profess. Another question is it always difficult to obey God? No. It's difficult when you're holding on to things that are not in line with what He's asking you to do. For example, if you are in Nigeria, you know that once you're done with secondary school, you're writing your JAMB, and from there you are going to university to write, go through all that process. And then that space after you've written your JAMB, God is telling you, I need you to be doing something else. I don't need you in that school space for at this point in time. I don't need you there. If you're holding on to societal time, that by this age I'm supposed to be doing this, by this age I'm supposed to be doing that, it will be more difficult to obey God than if you just said, okay, Lord, I've heard you, I've heard what you're saying to me, and I submit myself to you. I know it's easier said than done, but it's also easier achieved. Obedience is actually easier achieved this way than stressing. It's something I've come to realize. Instead of holding on to what I feel I might have lost, or what I feel I might lose from carrying out this task, or what I feel I might not be able to achieve in doing what God has asked me to do, it just makes the whole process harder, because at the end of the day, I need to obey. That's the point. I need to obey, because if I'm to weigh my options, the consequences of disobeying and what I would eventually, in quotes, lose or not lose, I would just rather obey. And so if I know I ought to obey, or at the end of the day I'm going to obey, why make the whole process hard for me? So to answer the question, it is not always difficult. There are times where it's honestly, sincerely very difficult, but it's not always difficult. You just need to know when to let go of yourself, know when to let go of other things that will not be in line with the obedience, and generally just look around, look through that situation. What about that situation is making your obedience difficult? Because most times it might not be the task that is difficult, but it's what you perceive will be consequences of that act that might be what would cause what will just make the whole process of obeying difficult for you. Another question is, what do I do when everything around me seems to be working against my obedience? What can I do when my friends, my family members, the people I hold dear, everybody is working against this act, is working against the thing God has asked me to do? It seems like nobody is supporting me. It seems like everything is crumbling. What do I do then? I'm going to give you this response as someone that has been in that situation before. You still to go back to God. I've not found it. Maybe if I find other answers as the years go by, I would share. But for now, I've not seen any other answer. The only thing, I just roll back to God. In some cases, you might have to change your environment. Not necessarily, you can change your parent, or you might just need to stay away from that space. But then, what has always worked is still going back to God. When everything seems like it's working against that thing God has asked you to do, is still to sit with God. You can't. Okay, let's take the time to think. Just 5 seconds. What else would you do? If you know truly you want to obey what God has asked you to do, what else can you do? Is to sit back with Him and ask Him, what do I do now? Nobody's supporting me. Everybody seems to be against me. What do I do now? He would give you strategies. He will give you answers. He will tell you what to do. He will tell you how to handle this situation. I can't give you what might have worked for me, because what might have worked for me is not generic, is not the template as to what will work for you. But what is the template is to sit with Him and ask, what can I do? Consult Him. He will give you the answer. And the last question that I asked myself. Now this video is actually quite vulnerable for me, because I am somewhat in this season where obeying Him, I'm in the process of obeying Him, but it all seems so very tasking. And then I find myself sometimes asking, what if I fail? First thing I do is that I rebuke that thought, because that is not of God. I have to go back to the word. This is just the dramatic me now. But the way I just jumped at you listening to this or you watching this, that is exactly how I deal with the situation. I'm like, nope, that's not my thoughts. That's not my thought. What if I fail? As how? And then you're hearing questions like, did God really say this? God said it. God said it. Yes, and I'm going to sit there. I'm going to stick there, because I know He said it. And so, to answer that question, what if you fail? What if you don't? Now, that's, by the way, I don't want to go through that angle, but whenever you have thoughts like that, or whenever thoughts like that come around you, and then you begin to nurture it in your mind, you're now looking at your skills, you're looking at you're looking at your abilities, instead of looking at God. Let me give it the example we're all familiar with. David. You're familiar with David. You know what David went through with Goliath. You see, at that point where he was about to strike Goliath, when Goliath was telling him how small he is, how he's unable to beat him, how he's unable to do this and do that, what did David do? David did not say, oh, as I've come now, even though I'm small, he said, come in the name of the Lord. And that, my dear, is how you come in. You're not coming in the name of yourself. You're not doing that thing in your name. You're not following that direction. You're not following that instruction in your name, or even based on your ability. You are doing it in the name of the Lord. So you cannot fail. You can't fail. It's important I let you sit with that. You cannot fail. If it's God, you can't fail. You can't. Two things will either happen. It's either that thing is very successful, or there's a deviation. He then moves you to do something else. What we would define as success is not necessarily what God would define as success. So when He asks you to do something, that thing He's asking you to do might actually be the means to an end. But you might be thinking that thing He has asked you to do is the end. It might be a means to an end. So when it's not now working the way you thought it would work out, you think, oh, it has failed, but it hasn't failed. In God's plan, it hasn't failed. You are still right in track. So just know that regardless of the outcome, you cannot fail. Someone says it this way: head or tails, I win. Day or night, I win. So regardless of what you think or you perceive the outcome to be, you win. And that is what you must sit with. That is the thought you must always constantly have, that you cannot fail as long as it's God. There's something someone says to me, is like, God cannot mismanage your life. I've said this on the podcast before, and if you're listening to this for the first time, it's important you hear this. God cannot mismanage your life. So don't fear. Don't let the devil sit you with that fear. And don't you nurture the fear. Don't nurture that thought. You cannot fail. As I bring this episode to a close, I want you to note that life in God demands your obedience. There's no negotiating. If you know you're going to walk in the will of God, if you know you're going to work in with his directions and the seasons that he has planned out for you, you must obey. It demands it. All right? Once again, I'm inviting you to this month's episode digest happening live on our Instagram page on Friday, the 21st of March. Be there, don't miss it. This month, we're going to be having a very solid conversation with Gideon Vase. So make sure you don't miss it. Make sure you don't miss it for anything. All right, invite your friends, invite anybody. We're going to be talking about seasonal directions. We're going to be digesting these two episodes that we've already heard. These two episodes we've taken in, we're going to digest it on the live episode. So get your questions ready, get everything set and ready. Also, if you are in Abuja and you have not registered to be part of the Deployed to Recruit evangelism movement, I'm telling you, you're missing out big time. We're having trainings. We are in the second week of the training. The trainings are scheduled for 4 weeks, once every week for 4 Thursdays. And we are in the second Thursday. So you have the opportunity. Click on the link below, sign up, make sure you are a part of this move. This is the year we do big things for God. This is the year we talk to people about Jesus. This is not the year to be afraid. For we are not given the spirit of fear, but the spirit of courage. So get ready, get set, and we are deployed for Christ. All right. Have a lovely, lovely day. Have a lovely, lovely month. You just listen to the How is Life podcast, and I am your host, Chidinma Chika. Stay blessed. Bye.